Thank you for being here. I'm a solution architect at AWS. My name is Gerardo. You don't have to pronounce it like that. You can say Gerardo or Jerry, or some Aussies call me Jessa. So today we're going to be running a whole bunch of announcements. We only have 15 minutes with you, so we made an executive decision of not running across everything. These 3 links you can take home. So those are some links that are going to give you to all the announcements that we made at reInvent and the week before reInvent. So on the stuff that we're going to tell you today, it breaks my heart to say we're not going to talk about SageMaker. There were a lot of announcements on SageMaker. We took out SageMaker, IoT, and we left some things that we think are the top announcements across everything else, and announcements that are relevant for the Sydney region. Something else you're going to see on the slides is when there's a sign that says GA, it means the service is generally available right now. You can take advantage of it right now. All the services are in preview, meaning that you can request access for it. And finally, there's another figure there that has the SYD letters, and that means that the service is available and in Sydney. There's 2 themes we're going to be talking about today out of the launches we had recently. One is around extending the AWS region. The second one is around how we're working really hard, and we've kept working really hard to keep extending the AWS capability that you get, maintaining the deep and broad platform that you expect from AWS. And we're going to talk about a couple of areas in that: compute, storage, databases, analytics, security, networking, developer experience, and AI. And with that, I'll be back with you in a second, because the first section is going to be done by Gavin.
Good afternoon. There are a few familiar faces in the audience, but for those that don't know me, as Dan said, I'm Gavin Allen. I'm a Technical Director for Application Development in the North region for Versent. First up, I'm going to be talking about the extending AWS beyond the region. Because, as we all know, AWS releases features at a pretty phenomenal rate. Increasingly, customers are asking for help to run their workloads in a more distributed kind of fashion, more distributed locations. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is AWS Outposts. So this is a fully managed service. Outposts was actually launched last year at reInvent, but it's now this year's reInvent. It was made generally available. It's a fully managed service. It provides that sort of AWS infrastructure on-premise and allows for very low latency between your day-to-day operational capability and the actual AWS infrastructure. It gives you effectively AWS capabilities in your own data center, which means it's not, and one of the key things that it's not is it's not a private cloud. It just gives you much better portability of applications, but also it means you're using the consistent API set and consistent tool set for AWS for applications that are very local to you. This is what one actually looks like. We got to see one at reInvent. It's very tidily cabled. The key thing with these boxes, when you do have them, when they're in your data center and they are running, you do not need to touch them. They basically will be looked after, maintained, everything by AWS. In fact, they very, very much prefer that you don't touch them. These are some of the additional AWS services that are supported on Outpost. So at the moment, there's ECS and EKS for containerized workloads. It will be supporting EMR locally for on-premise data processing, RDS, of course, and S3 is coming later, next year. In addition to Outposts, there's a couple of other infrastructure concepts that have been made available now. The first is the AWS local zone. The local zones kind of extend the AWS cloud into more locations around the world. They operate more as an extension of existing AWS regions. So it pushes the boundaries of where the regions actually sit. It's like in the console, it appears like a mini availability zone. First zone is going to be located in Los Angeles, but obviously this is going to spread out around the world as it rolls out. AWS Wavelength. So this is a really interesting new capability. So this is going to be AWS infrastructure actually installed within telecoms providers. So what it allows them to do is leverage the 5G network to really make that processing capability much, much closer to devices. Some of the use cases for that, you'll be looking at things like smart cars, gaming, IoT devices, all these kind of things. It's really just to work with the telcos directly. There are some providers.
We had was Verizon in the US, but we're working with others globally, including Vodafone, and we're having discussions with some of these telcos here in Australia.
What this really means for you as customers, like I said, like Outpost isn't the private cloud option, but what it does do is it allows AWS to get closer to you, closer to your organizations, close to your customers, to provide those low latency capabilities that are obviously more and more in demand. Terms and conditions apply to Outpost. Like I said, hands off. They don't like you touching those. One thing that we're very proud of is that Versent is actually the launch partner for Outpost in Australia and New Zealand. So if you do actually want one of these things, then come talk to us. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Geraldo.
Cool. So just a recap on what we saw before, we're extending the AWS region, and all of these options, for all these options, the control plane still sits in the AWS region. So that's why they cannot be seen as standalone pieces of infrastructure. They're still connected to the cloud, and the region is still the cloud. They are more like deployment areas, or you can see them as an availability zone. It's not an availability zone, but it's like an availability zone. When you define subnets, you can deploy workloads in your wavelength or in your local zone or in Outpost. We continue to push innovation in compute. So we're going to talk about a bunch of releases that we had in that area. Now at AWS, we offer you the option to run containers in two main ways. With ECS, Elastic Container Service, which is the native way you run containers that integrates really well with all things AWS. But some customers want to run Kubernetes and take advantage of the community of Kubernetes. So we launched EKS last year. And what we did at reInvent last week is we announced AWS Fargate for EKS. And what this means is Fargate is a serverless way of running containers. There's no simpler way of running containers because you don't have to worry about servers, about patching, about the scaling. All of those things are taken care on your behalf. Fargate has been a very popular service that it's been available for ECS for a year or so. Now it's available for Kubernetes customers as well. And the end result and what it means for you is if you're running Kubernetes, now you can focus a lot more of your time into what really matters, which is your containers and your applications as except to all the glue that actually Kubernetes takes to run. So if some of you have tried to run Kubernetes outside of a managed service, you can realize how painful that is, especially if you want to do it at scale and multiple availability zones. So take a look at that. Not available in Sydney yet, but it's generally available in other regions. Stay tuned for Sydney. On ECS, we had a whole bunch of announcements. This is just a summary of 4 of those announcements. Fargate Spot. So are you guys familiar with Spot instances? Anyone's familiar with Spot instances? So there's a common misconception, and it's our fault, because when we launched Spot instances a long time ago, we made it based on supply and demand. So at some point, it started behaving like a stock market, and prices were widely varying. But we stopped that a couple of years ago, and now Spot instances are actually very predictable low prices. So you can get discounts of 70 to 90% if your workload can be stopped. Because with Spot instances, you're using AWS's spare capacity. And when a customer of ours wants to launch that as an on-demand instance, we may take it from you. So it's for fault tolerance workloads. That capability is available for EC2, and we're making it available for AWS Fargate as well. So if you're running fault tolerance container services, you can save around 70% of the cost with Spot. We also launched something called Amazon ECS Capacity Providers, which is a way in which you can focus more on their scaling requirements of your cluster, as opposed to having to worry about the underlying EC2 instances. And that's a capability that helped us launch ECS cluster autoscaling. So now instead of focusing on the metrics at the instance level, you focus on your applications and on your cluster level. So it heavily simplifies the way you do autoscaling for containers so that you improve scalability and reduce operational costs on containers. It also has improved capability for scaling from 0 and down to 0. And something else that I skipped is the preview of the ECS CLI version 2.0. So this is a much improved version that makes the developer experience much better. It includes things like command prompts and guided walkthroughs. to make it easy for you to launch ECS clusters and manage your containers in the cloud. Another thing that is included in the CLI is the ability to use AWS SSO. So you can federate, if you're federating against Microsoft AD, you can get those credentials right on the CLI without having to rotate the credentials yourself, making it more secure. So a lot of customers, of our customers, spend time trying to manage what those golden server images look like. In EC2, that's called an AMI, although there's debate about that, AMI or AMI. I don't have a stance on it, but people get really strong opinions. Anyway, so they spend a lot of time, because when you want to bake an AMI or an AMI, you have to launch the server, you have to do all the changes, and then you can take a snapshot of that. A lot of our customers have built some automation to make this faster and easier, but they have asked us to help with that, so that's why we're launching EC2 Image Builder. So now it's a simple way of creating images, and it doesn't only work for EC2, it also works for on-prem. If you're doing things like VHDK or VMDKs or OVFs images, you can use EC2 Image Builder. There's no cost associated from it, apart from the fact that if you're running servers, there's charges for that, and if you're storing images, there's charges for that, but the service itself comes at no additional cost. And what you get out of this is improved productivity. All right, so moving on. Who doesn't like a nice and deep discussion about software licensing? No one does. And we know that our customers don't, so that's why last year we launched AWS License Manager. And License Manager has been a service that our customers have been using a lot. But when customers have the option, when they're running Windows workloads, to either consume the licensing from us or bring their own, and it's always been the case. But with License Manager, they still had to do some automation and some configuration in order to do the installation of the media, in order to manage the capacity and the usage of the dedicated hosts on which you launch bring in your own license. So what we've done now is we have heavily simplified this process for both Windows Server and Windows and SQL Server, so that we do the automation, the capacity management. So the experience from the customer is a couple of clicks on the console, you define what your licensing terms are, you define how the capacity on the host should be managed, and then we do everything else. And we also automate things like the installation of media and patches and all of that. So making licensing better so you don't have to spend more time on licensing. No one likes to spend time on licensing. Something else we launched at reInvent is the end of support migration program for Windows, sometimes called EMP. We have a lot of customers running Windows. In fact, there's more Windows workloads running on AWS than anywhere else in terms of cloud providers. And our customers have been pushing us to make it easy for them to handle what happens after they go out of support from the software vendor. So for Windows Server 2003, Windows Server 2008, you get first access to AWS SMEs that will help you drive the upgrades for your critical workloads using a robust and a proven methodology that we've been iterating on in the past. But you also get access to a set of tooling that will abstract your application from the dependencies on that old operating system. And it's going to be able to run that on newer versions of the operating system like Windows 2016, Windows Server 2016. So what you get is you get the peace of mind, you future-proof your applications, you eliminate the reliance on the old bits of the operating system, and you can accelerate your migration to the cloud. That's AWS EMP. Now, at reInvent, we also launched the AWS Compute Optimizer, and this is a bit different, slightly different than the way that you normally get recommendations. So if you used to go on Trusted Advisor to get recommendation for instance sizing, the logic that was there was similar to what you get with other third-party tools. But what we're doing now is we've integrated this with machine learning. So now we have algorithms that are learning about the profiles of your applications, and now we're able to give you with a lot more confidence recommendations, not only on the instance type that you should be running, but also on the auto-scaling configuration. So we're heavily simplifying the way that you choose your instances so that you can maximize your performance and pay us as least as possible as you can. So we want to save you money. This is one way of doing it. It's a service that is free of charge as well. we didn't launch this at reInvent, but it was soon before reInvent, and I think it's worth touching on, saving plans. Who here is familiar with reserved instances? Yes, most of you. Who here loves managing reserved instances? No one, again. Because it turns out that we launched this concept of reserved instances where when you commit, you're going to use certain instances for a period of time, and you define what region that is, sometimes what availability zone, sometimes what instance family and size, then that's okay if you have a couple of those. But once you're running hundreds or thousands of instances, it becomes really hard to manage the renewal of these reserved instances, and also it's not very flexible. You have to make commitments at the region level sometimes, and at the family level. So what we're doing is, based on feedback, is our customers don't want to spend a single second thinking about reserved instances. Now they can, and they can still access the same savings with something that we call savings plan. So with savings plan, you basically define a $1 per hour figure. And that's all you care about. So you define that, and then every compute service that you consume underneath that, including ECS, EKS, including EC2, including Fargate, is going to be measured against that. Everything on top of that, you pay on-demand prices. Everything below that, you pay the reserved price that you're getting the same types of discounts that we're getting out of reserved instance. And you also get the flexibility. So you don't have to worry about making these hard choices. You get the same level of discounts in a much simpler way. And we're also making this super easy for you, because now when you go into Cost Explorer, you'll see the recommendation that, hey, you're spending with us this money, but if you make a couple of clicks, you can activate savings plan to save some money. So super easy. You're going to spend a lot less time on licensing, but also a lot less time on reserved compute. Available in Sydney, by the way. Now, who here knows that AWS is a CPU manufacturer? Yes. It's not actually widely known, but at reInvent last year, we announced that we were working on a chip called AWS Inferential. And and the reason why we started working on it is because there's a lot of money spent in machine learning. There's a lot of money spent on the inference side of things. And we've been using GPU instances, not because they were designed for machine learning, but only because they were the ones that performed the best at a time. And these were created for graphical use cases. So we started working on this last year, and today we're announcing an instance that is based on that AWS Inferential chip called Amazon EC2 Inf instances. And these deliver three times higher throughput and up to 40% lower cost on inference compared to GPU-based instances. So it's a significant improvement. So it's generally available, not in Sydney today, but stay tuned. Along the same lines of hardware development, we announced at reInvent last year the first type of instances of a chip called the AWS Graviton. Now, Graviton is not an x85 CPU, it's an ARM CPU. And they became really popular for customers, but they kept pushing us on actually make them a lot more performant. And that's what we did. So we announced at reInvent this week the AWS Graviton 2 processor, which enables the best price performance for cloud workloads. It is also an ARM-based chip, and it's built on very cutting-edge technology. To give you an example, or one piece of data, it's built on 7-nanometer silicon process, and other CPU manufacturers out there, like Intel, they are at 14 at the moment. Only Apple and AMD have gotten down to 7 nanometers. So this is really cutting edge stuff. And the type of performance you get on this chip, we're expecting 7x performance and 5x faster memory, including things like deep RAM encryption, which is something that you can only do on AWS, by the way. So this chip, we're expecting it to be very popular. Not for x85, but for ARM type of workloads. And the first instance that we'll launch on that is the MG6. It's available today in preview, and you can expect a 40% better price performance than what you get with a similar type of machine in the x85 world. And you can expect 2 other versions, like compute intensive and a memory intensive one later in 2020. About 10 years ago, or 2 months from 10 years ago, our chief evangelist, Jeff Barr, on April's Fool's Day, he wrote a blog post saying that here's the new quantum compute instance by AWS. And it was a joke back then. In less than a decade, it stopped being a joke, and the future is here. So what we're doing now is we're giving you a managed service so that you can start playing with quantum algorithms. Now, quantum, for those that are not familiar with this, and I hope there's not a scientist here that knows better than I do because I know very little, quantum has the capability of solving a lot of problems for the human race that we're not able to solve with traditional compute. Because the performance that you get out of quantum algorithms is exponentially higher in several orders of magnitude than when you get with classical compute. The way this works is, or roughly, I'm not going into the details, but in the computers, instead of measuring things in ones and zeros, there's this concept of qubits, of qubits, which basically it's a probability or a vector of probability of how something can be in 0 or in 1 or in both at the same time. If you're familiar with quantum mechanics, then you know what I'm talking about, but this is as far as I go. The important thing is, hardware today, or quantum computers today, are very hard to access, are very expensive, and they only go up to 50 qubits. So we haven't actually breached a number of qubits that we can actually get some real stuff done. But we think that this is going to be very important for the future. So what we've done is we're giving you a single environment so that you can design your algorithms. You open a Jupyter notebook so you can start coding quantum algorithms. You can test them and simulate those tests. But at the same time, you can actually run them on actual quantum computers. So we partner with 3 companies that are going to provide this. And these machines are actually, they need to be on very controlled physical environments. And now you can rent that as a service the way you expect from AWS. So you can run some quantum algorithms there and get familiar with the technology and prepare for the future, because this thing is going to be significant for the human race. Moving on to AWS Snider Enclaves. So AWS Nitro, for those that are not familiar with it, is the hypervisor, the newest hypervisor that we launched at reInvent 2 years ago. And it's the way that we have reworked all the components of our hypervisor to try to decouple them and make custom chips for every functionality. This is some of the secret sauce that allows AWS to have so much bandwidth in their instances, to keep releasing types of instances, to the performance being so good. Because it's enabled us to innovate in multiple different layers. One of the things that we launched at reInvent on top of Nitro is Enclaves. And this is about secure computing, where you can actually crunch and process things in an isolated environment. Now, this is very useful for keeping sensitive or confidential data away from people and from even your own admins. So the way it works is you can carve out some processing power and some memory out of your instance, and the enclave won't have any disk access or any network access. So you interact with the enclave, you do all the processing on the enclave, and you only get the response back. So that way, it has a bunch of applications such as tokenization. So with tokenization, you transform sensitive data like PII, or personally identifiable data, or credit cards into tokens. And then if you don't want to be handling that token in your application, you want that to be in an isolated, you send that token to the enclave, you process that there and do whatever you need to do with the credit card number, and then you come back with the result. So it's a lot more secure, it's at the hardware level, and it's something that is on preview today, which should be available pretty soon.
Okay, so really what this means for you as customers is that going cloud native starts to become easier, because especially if you're moving into a containerized environment, because as Geraldo mentioned, you don't want to be, if you can avoid it, running like a bare metal kind of EC2 instance-based Kubernetes cluster, because that's a lot of overhead, that's a lot of orchestration. So this makes it a lot easier to basically manage that Kubernetes cluster. It works very well as well if you've already got some sort of ECS footprint to sort of enable you to get there. And a lot easier to manage Windows licensing and capabilities. It's basically an escape plan for your end-of-life Windows instances. Been a big problem for customers in the past. Security and networking. Obviously, security is paramount to pretty much everything you do in technology. It underpins everything you do, and there's a lot of security capability in AWS. A lot of announcements came out around this during the time of reInvent. So one of the sort of big things is about building up your guardrails. There's having good guardrails in your accounts and on your services is absolutely paramount. So there are two kind of main themes towards this. There's the kind of detective side where it's about investigating issues once they've occurred, finding out what the root cause is, allowing you to sort of address them in a timely fashion. And then there's the preventative guardrails that are there to try and stop these issues from happening in the first place and try and keep you safe. One of the first products that we're talking about is CloudTrail Insights. These are tools that are there to kind of help identify when there's anomalies in your CloudTrail logs. So it's kind of looking for patterns, it's looking for these anomalies in all of your CloudTrail log data without needing to kind of sit in there and try and trawl through all these logs with third-party or manual tools and actually understand what's going on. It's really good for SOCs and basically allows you to have a greater assurance that when something happens that's out of order, you're going to find out a lot faster about it. So what actually happens is initially CloudTrail kind of looks at your logs and understands what a baseline is for normal activity, and then it will use that as the kind of baseline to look for anomalies or statistical anomalies outside of those, and then it can raise alerts and sort of let you know that something's wrong. Next one, AWS Detective. So this is more about that, being able to dig down and understand the root cause of within your network. It's a new service, and it makes it a lot easier to analyze and visualize any of that security data to kind of rapidly get down to that root cause. This is really to enable your security teams to more quickly find root cause problems and actually fix them. It uses machine learning, statistical analysis, graph theory, and it gives you all this kind of machine learning across the top of it that actually then presents this to you and allows you to find out where those issues came from. It's constantly updating itself as well as all that new telemetry kind of comes in, so it's understanding your environment so it can help you find problems. AWS IAM Access Manager. So as we all love managing IAM policies, S3 buckets open to the world. We hear about it every now and again. Somebody misconfigures something. That's where these kind of problems can turn up, especially if you've got a big, complicated environment. You've got a lot of things being deployed. These kind of things can slip through the net if you're not very rigorous around your controls. The idea with Access Analyzer is that it automatically looks across your infrastructure and actually tries to find IAM policies that are misconfigured or basically are going to cause you any problems. So this is one of those preventative guardrails. It's really there to stop you doing something that you really don't want to be doing. So single sign-on's been around for a little bit, I believe. There are some newer features that were brought on in the course of last week. Things like more identity source options and just easier control across the whole of your sort of network because it allows you to access it from any interface now. So it's just expanded on the capabilities and made it easier to use. So again, this for kind of the SOC and all your security teams, it just allows them to give greater control around access into the accounts, and it actually decouples you from needing to use any specific identity provider, so you can kind of bring your own, or including like Azure, or not actually need to bring one at all. You can actually use the AWS capabilities. Transit Gateway into region peering. So Transit Gateway's been around for a little while, but this is a new feature that's especially good for international or multinational companies, I should say, because it allows for the inter-region connectivity through Transit Gateway, and managing that kind of connectivity. If you're doing it in a more traditional sense, if you weren't doing it between regions, then that can become difficult, complex to manage. What this allows you to do is consolidate that management. You can get thousands of VPCs, connect them all up, and it gives you that assurance that it's all going through Transit Gateway, so it's no single point of failure. And it just allows you to scale up your network a lot more cleanly, a lot more easy to manage. So another feature that was released was the accelerated site-to-site VPN. If a customer has multiple sites and they want to be able to ensure that site-to-site security, this allows that to happen over the sort of site-to-site VPN, so you're not exposing anything out to the world. Basically gets you off the public internet if you've got multiple sites. Because it's routed through AWS and it's all over the VPN, then you're not transiting through the public internet, and it just, again, more secure. Transit Gateway Network Manager. This is, again, another service that's been introduced. This one's to really give you that kind of single pane of glass view across your transit gateway and make it a lot easier to manage all of your network. It's a tool that has the dashboards and the things that people like to manage all of their infrastructure, gives you that visualization. It just makes it much easier if you're scaling up to a kind of global level, if your organization is that kind of multinational thing. If you've got to manage all of this stuff with Transit Gateway and with everything else, it just lets you see what's happening, basically lowering the administration effort that it takes to look after your network through Transit Gateway. So if you're an organization that uses multicast, or if your customers use multicast, so really for kind of broadcast companies, media companies, there's now a kind of native multicast capability in Transit Gateway with support in Transit Gateway. So it's a highly requested feature from AWS customers. It lets you scale up and down your kind of multicast environment based on demand. So as a lot of AWS features are, and more people are embracing that kind of the kind of pay-as-you-go model when it comes to AWS services. So it allows you to do that with a multicast capability. And it gives you that kind of fine-grained control about who can produce and who can consume the information. VPC English Routing. So I think this was support for English routing that was launched at reInvent. Apparently it's a highly requested capability. It basically offers the flexibility to associate route tables with internet gateway and virtual private gateways. And you can kind of route that inbound traffic through specific services, specific applications to allow you to more closely monitor inbound traffic, allowing the SOC and the security teams to basically have more control, more visibility, and apply more kind of safety across inbound traffic into your networks. So what this means for you, it's about building up those guardrails, really having the safety net around you when you're using AWS. The shared responsibility model is obviously really important, but these services allow you to operate more safely in those kind of environments. Empowering customers with less capabilities. This is a key thing that I think you see a lot more from AWS now, is about the providing not just the raw infrastructure, the raw capabilities, but actually providing services that allow you to work within smaller teams, but have the capabilities to do normally what would be considered a complicated or overburdensome sort of capability that larger organizations can afford to just throw people at, whereas now a lot of this load is taken off from you by the AWS tooling. Obviously, it's a big beefing up of the transit gateway as well. So when it comes, again, it's that limited resources for network management, single pane of glass makes it a lot easier, a lot simpler. It enables you as a business to operate more easily.
So storage, database, and analytics. So the first capability we launched on S3 was called Amazon S3 Access Points. And the reason that this became a thing is traditionally, on an S3 bucket, you put a lot of objects, and then you control access to that S3 bucket in a couple of ways. You have user policies, and you have bucket policies as well. So with a single policy, or in a single way, you control access to all the data sets in that bucket. As customers are starting using S3 as their data lake of choice, they're starting putting all the enterprise data into a single bucket. So having just one policy or a couple policies isn't good enough. If you want to have control over how you expose and to whom you expose certain data sets of all that data lake, you're going to need a better way, and this is the better way. So now you can configure access points, multiple access points on a single S3 bucket, and then define a policy for that particular access point so you can have control as to how and which data sets you share with whom. It's available right now in Sydney. In AWS, we believe that you should be using the right tool for the right job, because when you do, you're saving money, you are more performant, you save a lot of time in things that you don't necessarily have to do if you're using the right tool for the right job. And a lot of our customers are running Cassandra, and this is why we have launched the Amazon Managed Apache Cassandra Service, or MCS, I think we call it internally, Amazon MCS. And it's exactly that. So it's a Cassandra compatible managed service with all the things that you would normally expect or you've come to expect from AWS. It distributes your data across 3 availability zones, copies your data multiple times, is secure and encrypted by default. It gives you high performance at any scale. You have single-digit millisecond response at any scale. And you can control access in the same way that you do with IAM. So this is available in preview at the moment, but we should be able to enjoy it pretty soon. Amazon Aurora Machine Learning Integration. So this is available in Sydney, and it's basically a way in which, by using the SQL commands that you are familiar with, you can also get some predictions that are sitting on a machine learning model, sitting on SageMaker or maybe on Comprehend. When you set up Aurora in MySQL compatible or Postgre compatible versions, you can link that up with a model running on SageMaker, and when you run that query, it can come back with some predictions as well. So you don't have to learn, your developers don't have to know anything about machine learning. They don't have to know about the model. They just run their SQL query and then they get some predictions back. Available only on a couple of versions, MySQL 5.7 and PostgreSQL 10 point something. All right, so Amazon RDS Proxy. For those customers that have been building modern applications, especially if you're running serverless, interacting with databases can become challenging when you do that at scale. And the reason is, you open a large number of connections that could exhaust the database itself. So we've launched this service called Amazon RDS Proxy, which is in preview at the moment, which is basically a way to make your database connections a lot more scalable and a lot more secure. So instead of connecting directly to the database, you connect to the proxy, and then the proxy is going to manage those connections for you. It's going to reuse the connections. And some of the benefit that you get out of using the proxy is it helps with fault tolerance as well. So if you have a failure on RDS or on Aurora or on an availability zone, it can reconnect those connections a lot faster than what you normally would without it. So it reduces the downtime by up to 66% when you have multi-availability failover scenarios. So it'll be available soon. On Elasticsearch, a lot of our customers are using Elasticsearch for indexing and querying and getting some insights on their logs or any sort of data. And what we're doing with UltraWarm is a new tier for Elasticsearch that basically lowers the cost significantly for some of those queries. About 1/10 of the cost of comparable tiers, like the hot tier for Elasticsearch. So now you can get up to 10 petabytes, I believe. Yeah, 10 petabytes. At 1/10 of the cost here, you can still run your analytics at scale. Now, the way this works is under the hood, all that data is actually stored in S3. And what we've done is we're using a custom, highly available kind of optimized nodes to index and process the data in a parallel way. All of that is abstracted from you. For you, it's the same interface. It's just 1/10 of the cost if you use the UltraWarm tier. It's in preview at the moment. All right, so Amazon Redshift RA3. So this stands for Redshift Analytics 3rd generation. This is a big step forward in terms of cloud data warehouses because basically we are scaling storage and you're buying and scaling storage and compute separately. The Nitro system is what sits underneath here, and it allows a whole bunch of bandwidth that goes to S3, and the results that we're getting from this is delivering around 3 times the performance that you get out of any other cloud data warehouse out there. So this is a game changer, but it's not the only thing that we launched for Redshift. Customers that are sitting on the traditional DS2 instances, they can simply change their instance type, and they're immediately going to get twice the performance and twice the storage for about the same cost. So a huge step forward. But an even bigger step forward is going to be when Aqua becomes available. Right now, it's just a preview, but it's advanced query accelerator for Amazon Redshift. And what it is basically a new distributed and hardware-based accelerated cache for Redshift. And the way it works is we're bringing compute closer to the storage. We're building this huge layer of cache in front of S3 that scales automatically. And it's built on the natural system as well. And what we expect Aqua to deliver is about 10 times the performance of any other data warehouse in the cloud. So this is going to become available by mid-2020. And when it does, the performance of the previous instances that we saw as well are also going to benefit from it. So if you're running data warehousing technology in your company, so you want to, I strongly suggest that you consider taking a look at Redshift because it's becoming a lot more performant, and and the price benefit ratio is becoming increasingly more appealing. And we also had more features for Redshift. So now we have something called the Redshift Federated Query, which allows you to, with a single query you make against Redshift, you can also look up data that sits on RDS or on Aurora. Instead of having to move data around or do multiple queries with different technologies, single query at Redshift allows you to get both the analytical insight from your data, but also the operational live data that could be sitting on RDS or on Aurora. This is available in preview at the moment. And one final, I think this is the final one on Redshift, is data lake export. So we've seen a lot of customers moving away from having all their data on a data warehouse, and instead they're having all their data in the data lake. So we're making it easy to export their data warehouse into their data lake using an open format called Apache Parquet, which is very popular and compressed. And basically this is making it easy because now customers can query and get insights from the data that now sits on the data lake using tools like Amazon EMR, using tools like Amazon Athena, and also import that into SageMaker if you want to do some machine learning on it. It also automatically partitions the data so that you get good performance when you consume that data out of the data lake. Available in Sydney now. And I think this is the final one for this section, AWS Data Exchange. This is a marketplace for data. So basically, as a consumer, in the past, if you want to get some data providers out there, you needed to have a transaction with them separately from the platform and then import that into S3. You need to pay them directly. You need to find them. They're not in a single place. So AWS Data Exchange is becoming that single place where you consume data from other providers. To give you examples, Reuters, who curate about 2.2 million news in multiple languages a year, you can get all of that. You can consume that data from Reuters. Change Healthcare, they process and anonymize more than 14 billion healthcare transactions and over $1 trillion in healthcare claims. You can consume that and make it part of your analytics or make it part of your machine learning models. Dun & Bradstreet, they maintain a database of more than 300 million businesses across the world. So now all that data is becoming available for you at its fingerprints. With a single click, you subscribe to the data, and then it gets imported into S3, where you could do anything you want at AWS. For providers, if you have data and you want to make some money or you want to share it with the world, you can also publish that on the AWS Data Exchange, reaching millions of AWS customers, and also without having to worry about storing the data and actually billing for the data and delivering the data. It's going to be a much better experience for data providers as well. So AWS Data Exchange, take a look at it if you want to get some data.
So what this means for you as customers. The ease of access points, S3 access, as I kind of mentioned earlier with the IAM role kind of stuff, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, but it does mean that it makes managing your access to it, your data, your content, everything that you've got in S3, it does make it a lot easier. Speed, I mean, the kind of performance improvements that some of the new Redshift capabilities, it really is so much cheaper, so much faster, and we have a lot of customers that use sort of Redshift in data warehouse and data lake scenarios, and some of them still are it takes a long time to process that data, and it becomes quite costly. All of these new features are going to massively lower your cost, but also improve the amount of time, or reduce the amount of time that it takes to process that data so you can start making decisions on it a lot faster. Federated query still being in preview though. So the developer experience. This is the bit that I really like because my background being software development and being the TD4 application development, this is my fun area. So this is the Amazon Builders Library. This is a really cool thing that Amazon have done now. Some of the people that went to reInvent with me, they attended there were quite a lot of sessions, and they attended those ones because they were how Amazon does its engineering, how it applies its own tooling to build new products, their approach to building at scale, all these kind of things. And several of them said they were by far the most interesting and the most valuable sessions that they went to. So Amazon's really opening up now about the kind of information that they share and how they approach things, the capabilities, their approach, the methodologies, all this kind of stuff. They are starting to release now. It's all coming out through the Amazon Builders Library, a really, really good resource for understanding how an organization as technologically advanced as Amazon actually uses their own tools to move themselves forward. Amazon Code Guru. This takes the huge amounts of code that exists in Amazon, and what they've done is they've put it all through machine learning with all the code reviews. I don't know exactly how many code reviews, but it's a lot. Years and years worth of code reviews, and put it into these machine learning models so they can automate the code reviews just straight out of the repositories. And when you put in a pull request, you can actually automate all of that. And that's years and years worth of learning that's gone into these models. And it can bring out optimization, cost improvements, all these kind of things. It has nice interface, so you can get the actual response back and the feedback on these things. I mean, the amount of time, the amount of money that it costs and to perform good code reviews. If you've got a lead engineer, if you think about the time that it takes for them to do, say, 1,000-line pull request, this will be able to give you most of that feedback really fast, really experienced kind of machine models. So massively lowering the impact on the team, the disturbance between the team can drop. If it's a fairly trivial change, you don't need a tech lead or somebody to come along and actually look at that for you. You can just run it through this, and you're off. Only available for Java at the moment. Other languages are coming. So provision concurrency in AWS Lambda, major performance improvement. It allows you to apply concurrency to existing functions in production, massively improves the performance. So wake-up times have obviously been a bit of an issue with Lambda in the past. In some scenarios, that improved over the course of the last year. But also now this provision concurrency can actually give you much greater kind of capabilities within Lambda from a performance perspective. HTTP APIs for Amazon API Gateway. Now, you can get a huge cost reduction using this. It's effectively, if you don't need some of the API management capabilities that API Gateway provides you, this is like a simplified almost version of that. But what it means is by not having those other capabilities in there, you reduce costs by up to 67% and latency improvements for up to 50%. So that potentially for systems like the internal application sort of API gateways that you need internally within your network and within your applications that you're consuming yourself, you don't need those API management capabilities. This would be a more suitable approach. AWS step functions, express workflows. So traditional step functions, you have a year basically before they time out. Very good for orchestrating long-running processes. Because of the model that they have about paying for transitions plus execution, sometimes when they scale, if you try and have like a burst capability on a step function, that can become less effective from a cost perspective. Express workflows have a 5-minute window. So when you need that orchestration to happen, but you need to be able to scale it up very quickly. You can get up to 100,000 events per second. Those high volume event processing workloads, it's excellent for that, and that's where the economies of scale kind of really kick in. EventBridge Schema Registry. So EventBridge came out sort of earlier this year. It's an extension of the CloudWatch events, but kind of productized. It's a great tool for helping build out the event-based applications. One of the things you always have to manage when you're kind of using this type of tooling is the actual schemas of those events. What EventBridge Schema Registry does is it will discover them automatically as you use it. It actually discovers those schemas, stores them in the library, integrates with your IDE, and generates kind of code bindings for you. And so you can work with those schemas within your IDE, and it just makes it a lot faster development process. You don't have to have a reference of what the schema looks like next to you. You can get kind of IntelliSense and all those kind of nice things. So schemas exist from some partners and SaaS applications already, so they're there as a kind of lookup within the library. That will obviously keep growing over time as more third parties and more partners come on board. So Amplify for iOS and Android. So this is, I guess, an extra abstraction on top of some of the tooling to work more easily within native mobile applications. So there was support for iOS and Android in the past, but this gives you a much greater capability to work with these SDKs and actually integrate with the other AWS services. So the Amplified Datastore, this is another capability that's been added to Amplify. Amplify's grown hugely in the last sort of 6 months. But Datastore is this multi-platform data store that you can have on sort of web, mobile, React Native, and the others. So really useful if you have larger data stores that the application needs to work with, or if you need offline capability, but you're working with a decent set of data. So it gives you that access to that data and that data capability directly on devices and in the web browsers. So what this means for you, if you have limited resources in your development teams for your technical capabilities within your organization, it allows you to, again, support your existing teams with services that Amazon have built or AWS has built. Giving you that transparency into your code quality is always going to be a benefit. And the Builders Library to kind of teach you or help learn those really good practices around how to actually work with these tools in a sort of best practice manner. Schema Registry, again, so this is stuff with the IDE. It's about improving the developer experience, reducing those lead times to actually build out new capabilities and actually get them out there for your customers.
So AI services, Amazon Kandra. So this is a search engine for your enterprise. So the search engine, when you're searching things in the internet, it's actually pretty good. When you put you query that on whatever search engine that you use, multiple of those, but they're all generally good because you rarely go to the second or the third page. In the enterprise, it's a lot different. So in the enterprise, we have data in multiple sources. You have SharePoint here, the wiki there, internal system, file system, and it's much more difficult for employees to find that out at the company. So we're trying to solve that problem with Amazon Kandra, which is a service that helps you integrate all these data sources in your enterprise. There are native connectors for some things like as I said, SharePoint or internal wikis or other internal systems, file systems, etc. The magic of it is because it's using natural language understanding. So it doesn't actually try to match the words you're saying, but the meaning of what you're intending to say. So when you look for things like, how long is maternity leave? It's not going to try to find the how, the long, the maternity, but it can know what you means, and it can come back with 14 weeks or whatever it is. Or how do I connect with VPN? If you do that at Amazon, can you imagine how many documents we have about VPNs at Amazon? Because all the services that we're building about VPNs. But if you put that on the system, then you'll get something that this user is probably meaning that they want to know how to connect with the VPN, and here's your article. So it's a search engine for the enterprise. You can configure things like you can tweak it or fine-tune it a little bit by giving certain documents more importance, and also configure how the system works based on the freshness of the document. This is available in preview, and we're hoping that we're going to solve and make a lot of our customers a lot more productive, because they should be able to find information a lot quicker than what they do today. Okay, another one is Amazon Recognition custom labels. So for those that are not familiar with Recognition, Recognition is a service that you provide an image, and then Amazon is going to give you some insights about the image. It's based on machine learning, but you don't need to know any machine learning because the algorithm's been trained by us. So you send us an image, and we can detect things like objects, we can detect faces, we can compare faces or celebrities, we can find sentiment in the person, identify where their eyes are, and things like that. But some of our customers want to identify other things. Like Recognition may be able to find a bear, but maybe not 3 different types of bears. Or an engine, but not different types of engines of different cars. So some of our customers, when they want to go to that level of granularity, they need to build their own machine learning model, until we launched custom labels. So now our customers, if they want Recognition to identify certain things, they can send us the data, they can label their images, and then we are going to train a machine learning algorithm in the background, and and the customers can able to access those things through the same Recognition API. So now Recognition can identify everything Amazon trains it on, and everything that you train it on. So a significant release that we made in computer vision. And lastly, this is the last slide, is Amazon Connect. So Amazon Connect is a cloud-based contact center, yes, for phones and agents responding to your calls. And it's been a very popular service in Australia and New Zealand. So a lot of customers are moving their contact center to the cloud. And the reason they're doing that is because this is very disruptive. It's very inexpensive, and they also add a lot of smarts around this using Amazon machine learning services. So they can plug it to Lambda, they can dump the data on S3, they can get, for example, Amazon Comprehend to get sentiment of those call transcripts. They can transcribe, they can translate, they can do multiple things. But up until reInvent, customers had to do this themselves. So they had to actually build all the glue and use all the disparate services. So what we're doing with Contact Lens, we're trying to give you a unified version with a lot of insights using those same services in the background. So now you can get like automatic call transcription, enhanced contact search, automated categorization of the call, theme detection, you can configure alerts, and all of that you get on a different dashboard. It's gonna give you a lot of those insights that you really want and that by today, you've been building yourself using AWS services. Now you're going to have a standardized thing on Contact Lens for Amazon Connect. All right, so that's it from me on the AI stuff. There were a lot of announcements on SageMaker. I wish I could tell you about it. We can talk about it later.
What this means for you as AWS kind of consumers and customers, that unstructured data that you have in your organization, as the organization grows, that amount grows, it becomes quite unwieldy. Personally have spent many an hour trying to find documentation for all kinds of things within organizations. This gives you the power to be able to find that stuff fast. Again, it's all about working faster and working smarter. The only thing is it searches everything. So just be warned, be careful. I'm sure there are filters and ways of sort of limiting this down, but you've got to be careful about your PII. You've got to be careful about potentially commercially sensitive information. So that's just, I guess, caution more than anything else. For people looking up like previous project information, frequently asked questions, that kind of stuff, absolutely fantastic for that kind of stuff.
So before we close, I want to show you something. And it may look scary, but it's not. It's actually a good thing. So this is a zoomed out version of how the AWS console looks like after reInvent and all the services that you can consume. And for some people, this is bad, but for others, this is actually really good. And we believe at Amazon, we've been working really hard for 13 years, not me, I've been there for 3 only, but Amazon's been working really hard for 13 years to give you the broadest, most robust, capability so that you as a builder and as a runner of a company, you can focus on what really matters for you. And you can only do that if you can get to pick the right tools for the right job. And we're not gonna stop now. We're gonna keep expanding our services and giving you more features so that you can really focus and unleash your developers' creativity to really satisfy your customers and build a better business. So with that, thank you. We're going to be taking questions, and I hope that you use all of these services and make your businesses better. Thanks.